Hey there. I, 34, female, have been married to my husband, 38, male, for 7 years, and we celebrated our anniversary just 2 weeks ago. I met him through a friend 9 years ago, and after dating for 2 years, we got married. We also have a 3-year-old daughter. On the day of our anniversary 2 weeks back, we had a bunch of people over, including my coworkers, and I could see that one of the female coworkers, probably in her mid-20s, was constantly hanging around my husband and refused to let him speak to anyone without accompanying him. I thought that was kind of weird, but when I pulled my husband aside and just asked him about it, he told me that it was nothing too crazy and she just looked up to him as a mentor. I believed him and didn't question it further. However, that very night I saw a text pop up on his phone from this coworker of his while he was putting our daughter to sleep. It was kind of late and I was a little curious to know what work-related query she could have at this hour, especially after spending all this time at our house. And I was maybe also a little suspicious since she was a young and attractive woman who seemed to be very interested in my husband, so I decided to check out the text. I knew his password, thankfully, since he never bothered to change it and it was easy to unlock his phone. I went through their chats, hoping for work-related topics, but was shocked to find at least 2 months' worth of flirtatious texts and plans for dates. I felt sick going through all of it, knowing that this man was currently with our daughter in the next room, and we just spent the day celebrating the 7th year of our marriage. There were even some late-night texts, which meant that he'd been texting her while laying right beside me some days. I was in shock, but did some quick thinking and decided to take a couple of screenshots of those texts and send them to my own number as proof. After that, I kept his phone aside and decided to confront him about it. Once our daughter was asleep, he came back to our room, and that's when I showed him what I found on his phone, without even wasting a second, and asked him what that was all about. I thought that he tried to deny it, or at least get defensive, but he didn't do any of that and was just very nonchalant about the whole thing. He said that it was just a fling, and I shouldn't bother myself too much about it since he's still with me. I was so taken aback that I hardly knew what to say to that. He continued speaking and told me that this was not even the only time that he cheated on me, but had only been caught once, and that I shouldn't take it to heart because after working so hard for so long, he deserves to have some fun as well and let off some steam. As if he was talking about playing video games and not freaking cheating on his wife of 7 years, whom he even happens to have a daughter with. I told him that this was unacceptable and that I was going to leave him now that I knew what had been going on behind my back. By then, I was screaming at him since I just couldn't keep calm anymore. But he only laughed in my face and asked me where exactly I was going to go if I did leave him because I was a stay-at-home mom and didn't really have my own money. That was a particularly low blow given that he'd been the one to persuade me to quit my job when we found out that I was pregnant. He'd convinced me that he earned well enough to run the house and would work even harder to bring home a substantial sum, and I could just relax through my pregnancy and then take care of the house and our baby. I'd been skeptical but naive as well and trusted him wholeheartedly, so I quit my job. And since then, I've been a stay-at-home mom. Back then, I'd never even imagined that he'd be throwing it in my face someday. We argued for a couple more minutes where he kept saying that there was nothing wrong with him cheating on me since he was a working man, and it wasn't fair to him that he'd constantly have to be bogged down by his wife and daughter all the time. I couldn't even try and make sense of whatever he was saying, because truth be told, it didn't. If he was so tired of his responsibilities, then he shouldn't have gotten married to me in the first place or had a daughter. And even after he cheated, He should have at least had the decency to own up to it and apologize, but here he was, trying to pretend that this was a normal thing to do. He'd thrown away almost a decade of being together over fun, and I just couldn't understand how he didn't see anything wrong with that. I finally realized that there was no point in trying to argue with him or even pretending that this marriage could be saved when he said that I was a stay-at-home mom and this is what I deserved, so I needed to just suck it up like everyone else and turn a blind eye to whatever I find. Without a word more, I packed some of my clothes and toiletries and my daughter's clothes as well, while he simply watched me and refused to say anything to stop me. Then, in the middle of the night, I booked a cab and left. I was hurt and angry, and by the time I got into the cab with my daughter, who was half asleep, I was crying so hard that I could barely see anything. He didn't try to stop me or even ask about our daughter and just let me leave. It was incredibly difficult to make that decision, but I'm glad that I did it and left him. I did have some money saved back from when I used to work, but thankfully my friend, whom I've been living with, has absolutely refused to let me pay for anything and has been taking care of me like a sister. She and I used to go to the same college back home, but weren't friends then. We only reconnected once we learned that we were now living just a few blocks away from each other, and she became a source of comfort and a reminder of home in this new, unfamiliar city. And right now, she's my only friend and my most important one as well. That night, when I landed at her doorstep with my daughter and sobbing like a baby, she took me in without any question, and after I explained the situation to her through tears, she was furious and promised me that I'd be totally fine. Within 3 days, she contacted one of the best family lawyers, who happened to be a family friend of hers, and I filed for divorce. The two of them said that they'd ensure I get what I deserve as a settlement, and that's what they've been doing. Because of his infidelity, my husband is about to lose thousands of dollars as compensation for our house, his cars, and all the expensive assets that he owns. He's also liable to pay me alimony and child support, which adds up to a huge amount. My husband's position and salary are quite high, so he most certainly can afford it. However, a couple of days ago, he called me up in tears and practically begged me to stop the proceedings, or at least be a little considerate about the settlement. He wanted to talk about this with me personally and try to come to an agreement before the next meeting, since he thought that claiming the house and his car was unfair, since he'd worked hard for it all and I knew about it. He said that he had invested a lot of time, money, and hard work into building this life for himself, and while he was ready to pay alimony and child support, he just wanted me to rethink my demands since it seemed too much. I found it very ironic that this man, who hadn't thought about the time and effort that I'd invested in our marriage even once before cheating on me, was now begging me to rethink my demands and take his feelings into consideration. He hadn't apologized for cheating on me either, and I could already tell that his tears weren't real and were only meant to stir some sympathy in me. I told him that he could go to hell for all I cared, and I'd make sure that I walk away with everything that he has, since as a stay-at-home mom who made life easier for him, this is what I deserve. And it's not a lie either. Back in the initial years of our marriage, he was always too exhausted from working overtime. And I was not just working at my own job, I was also doing all the work at home. It was only a few years that he was promoted, and even then I was the one taking care of everything at home and raising our daughters single-handedly. I was never appreciated for any of it, and he just took it all for granted, but he's going to know what I was worth now. But a part of me feels bad that I'm taking away so much of what he's built. I guess that's because I was with him every step of the way and knew how hard he worked to get where he is today. I'm not sure if I'm really entitled to it and feel weird about making him cry, even though he did the same to me. My friend has reassured me several times that there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing, and while I can still choose to not ask for his properties and assets, it shouldn't be because he's guilt-tripping me by crying on the phone. AITA for trying to take away everything my husband's bought over the years in the divorce settlement after he confessed to having cheated on me multiple times throughout the course of our marriage? Update 1. I decided not to change my list of demands. I read every single response that I got from you folks, and while there were a few sympathizing with my husband, the majority believe that I'm totally entitled to whatever I'm asking for since he's the one who cheated on me, in spite of having a daughter with me, and even mocked me for being a stay-at-home mom, when it was actually him who forced me into that role in the first place. So yes, I don't think I'm being too harsh. And for the ones asking, if he ends up agreeing to the terms, then I'll be walking away with the house that he used to live in, a vacation home in Cabo, his cars, both are luxury cars, several watches that he owns, and of course a huge sum as compensation. I don't know when or how this is going to happen, but well, I'm just hoping that things work out in my favor. Even if they don't, he'll still have to pay me child support and alimony since he owes me that much. I haven't told him yet about my decision, but I don't think I owe him that either. I might not tell him at all. Update 2. My husband caught on and realized that his phone calls and texts did nothing to melt me or change my mind, and I am in fact not going to back off. So last night, he decided to call me up and call me every derogatory name in his book, and said that he'd always known that I was a gold digger. This is really funny to me because when I met him, there wasn't much gold to dig. I told him that no matter what he said to me at this point, it didn't matter since he'd lost his chance to apologize and make things right with me long back, pretty much the day I left. And even after that, he didn't have the decency to even pretend that he regretted what he'd done to me, so I had no reason to take pity on him and let him have what he wanted. He sounded like he wanted to argue some more, so I hung up before he could say anything else, because honestly, I wasn't interested. Whatever he has to say to me will be said in front of our lawyers, and outside of that, I don't owe him a conversation at all. He's made it very obvious that he doesn't care about me or our daughter, since he didn't even try to fight for her custody, which was a shock to me. I'd always thought that if not for my sake, he'd never do anything to break up our family for the sake of our daughter, which has been a reassuring thought whenever I heard about other husbands cheating on their wives. But now I see that I was wrong. My daughter doesn't particularly care about whatever's happening, which is obviously fine since she's just 3 and she's used to her dad being gone for prolonged periods of time for work. But she does occasionally ask about him, and it breaks my heart, knowing that he doesn't care about her as much as I thought he did. It's been almost a month since I left, and I obviously do miss my old life and constantly feel like I'm being a burden on my friend despite her constant reassurance. My parents are also trying to help me out financially until I find a job or all of this comes to an end, since I'm going through a particularly tough spot right now. My friend says that I'm not to worry about the finances since she's loaded, but even then it feels weird to just live off of someone. Especially after what my husband said about me being a stay-at-home mom, that stung. I guess that one comment just got under my skin since I had been a career woman who'd given it all up for my family, and it felt like it just went in vain. I just hope I'm out of this mess soon. Update 3. So, 1 week has passed since the last update, and I've learned that my husband truly is the most disgusting and vile human to ever exist. He's trying to make me out to be an alcoholic and a lying cheater as well. He and his lawyer have resorted to dirty tricks and deception to ensure that I don't get anything at all out of this divorce now, since I've refused to back down. They produced photos of me with our neighbor, a young guy in his early 20s who moved in a couple of months back. He was a fashion photographer and lived by himself, so he'd often ask me for help when it came to cooking since he'd often mess up recipes. He bought a new camera a few months back, and since he needed a subject, he asked me to help him out, and I obliged. We clicked a couple of shots in my backyard, and it was a perfectly innocent and platonic thing. I even showed the photos to my husband afterward, and he seemed impressed with them as well. But now, He'd made it out to seem like some perverted and weird thing between the two of us and had accused me of having an affair with our neighbor. He'd cooked up great detailed stories of how he'd often noticed the guy dropping by unannounced and leaving after an hour or so whenever he wouldn't be home, and the neighbors could vouch for that as well. He knew about these visits since I'd never lied to my husband, and he also knew that he'd only dropped by for help with cooking or food since he was trying to learn. But now, of course, he was using it to his advantage and making me seem like a cheater. It was just so sick. And on top of that, he claimed that I had a drinking problem as well, so he'd already spent a ton of money on me, and I didn't deserve any more of it either. He claimed that I'd been lying about how I'd supported him throughout, and definitely was entitled to whatever he had because I'd been nothing but a liability so far, and he was glad to be rid of me, but wouldn't let me walk away with so much since I didn't deserve anything. I couldn't believe that he was stooping so low, but then again, that's really who he was, and I'd just been late to realize what kind of a person I'd been married to. I guess I'll just have to get more people, namely my neighbors, involved to prove that I'm not a cheater, because I'm not like him. And most people who know me know that I hardly ever drink unless it's a social event, and everyone's drinking as well. So the alcoholism claims will be pretty easy to disprove. I'm just sick and tired of this mess now. I want him to leave me alone for good, honestly. Update 4. Almost 3 weeks have passed since the last time we met, where he accused me of cheating on him and also of being an alcoholic. I was able to get some of my friends and my neighbors to give testimony in my favor, and they told me about how my husband had approached them earlier before me, but they told him that they weren't going to lie to cover up for him, which really made me feel grateful for the relationships that I'd made as a stay-at-home mom. At least some people valued me, so that was nice. Anyway, I was able to produce enough proof against his claims at yesterday's meeting, and it really felt like the settlement was going to work out in my favor after all. I guess he just couldn't stand it, knowing that he was going to lose, so he decided to get my friend involved. Around half an hour ago, my friend received a call from an unknown number, and she had a feeling that it might be related to me, so she recorded the call. And thank God she did. It was my husband asking my friend to kick me out and speak against me at the next meeting so that I don't get anything. He offered her a huge sum of money as well to buy her out, but lucky for me, my friend isn't a sellout. I could hardly believe that he was willing to go to such lengths just to avoid the consequences of his own actions. He's such a lowlife. I can hardly even believe that he's trying to do this, not just to me, but his own daughter as well. If my friend had kicked me out, our daughter would be out as well, and we'd both be in trouble. I had half a mind to ring him and give him a piece of my mind, but my friend calmed me down and convinced me to let it go, since there was no point in trying to talk to him, and it would just be wasting my own breath. I'm just so furious right now that I could actually slap him senseless. It's disgusting for me to even think that I've spent so much of my time and energy on this man. I tried to distract myself by going through jobs online since I desperately needed one. With or without the settlement, I want to make something of myself, and I desperately want to go back to work right now so that I can be independent again. I've already applied at a few places, and hopefully my skills will be sharp enough to make things work. I'm running dangerously low on the money I've saved, and I absolutely cannot afford to go broke right now. At least not until the settlement comes through. Hopefully it'll be done and dusted by the next meeting. Until then, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. Update 5. There's just one day to go for the final meeting, and my husband showed up at my friend's house to talk to me today. Initially, my friend was hesitant to even let him in, but I reassured her that I was ready to talk, and moreover, I was curious to know what he had to say for himself after everything that had happened. He looked dejected and upset, and I sort of did feel bad for him, but then I remembered whatever had happened these past few months, and all of it vanished. He didn't say much, just said that he was here to make one last plea to me. He apologized for every single thing he'd done, right from cheating on me to breaking my heart over and over again and trying to turn people against me. He said he was being a total greedy a-hole, and he realized that now. All he wanted was for me to spare the house. I could take away everything else if I wanted to, and he was fine with that, but that house held a lot of sentimental value for him. I told him that I'd think about it, but I couldn't guarantee anything. He thanked me and then left. It was weird sitting with him and having a civilized conversation with him after so long without a lawyer, but at least it gave me some sense of closure. And maybe I will let him keep the house, since I don't ever plan on moving back there. I think I might move into my friend's house permanently and rent her upstairs unit or something, since she's been talking about it anyway. I'm happy that it's all coming to an end now. Update 6. Wow, it's been a while since I posted, so yeah, it's done. The divorce is finalized and I own quite a lot now. It's almost surreal, but I don't feel any difference right now. I'm just relieved that it's all done with. As I'd said, I changed the terms of the settlement last minute and let my husband have the house, but everything else went to me. It did make a significant dent in his net worth, but it's nothing he won't be able to recover from eventually. It might take him a couple of months, but he'll be fine, so I don't feel too guilty about it. As of today, I'm divorced and thrilled about it as well. Right now, my only plan is to get back on my feet as soon as possible, and by that I mean find a job. I have been in the talks with a few companies, but I think I might just start my own business. My friend is now my permanent housemate as well, since I've paid her 6 months of rent and have moved in with her now. I'm finally done with my divorce, and my husband is now my ex-husband. This chapter of my life is finally over. Thank God for that. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.